Hello and welcome to another DotPi Python tutorial. This is the second video of a 3-video tutorial on the Python tool Super. In the first video tutorial I went through what Super does, how it works. Basically it lets you use methods from a superclass and import them into a subclass. So in this video tutorial I'll be going through an actual Python code worked example. So what we'd first do is define our superclass. This is a class I've called Travel Calcs, which will be our superclass. Basically it does some calculations on a journey which has distance and time information. So those are the variables fed in here in the constructor function which sets up our object. The next function is called speed, which just calculates the speed that we were travelling at on our journey, which is distance divided by time. And the third function is called return trip time. If we were to go to our destination and travel back to the start, how long that would take, which is just the time times 2. So now we've got our superclass all set up, we can define a subclass which uses those methods up here. So let's say we want to make a class specifically for car journeys, which uses the methods that we've already written in Travel Calcs. So the first step, if you remember, is to pass Travel Calcs, the superclass, into our subclass. So now we have access to those methods. Before I write anything else in my subclass, I'm just going to write the line of code that calls our subclass. So maybe car journey 1 might be our object name, and we'll create that using the car journeys class. And let's pass some information to it. If we want to measure the distance of a car journey, we'd usually use kilometers. So let's say 100 kilometers. And if we wanted to measure the time of the car journey, we'd usually use hours. So let's say this is a 100-kilometer car journey that takes 2 hours. So now we've got it set up so car journey should take in these variables and be able to use these functions. And at the moment that won't work, and I've done that intentionally because what you might have noticed is I've defined these variables as kilometers and hours, and our superclass is expecting the variables distance and time, so the wording's different. It won't like that. If I just write pass here and run the code, what has happened, got an unexpected argument, kilometers. These variables have been passed into car journeys. It's tried to then go straight to the superclass and collect all these methods, but it's expected distance and it's got kilometers. So the first step of using a subclass called superclass is to do the constructor function properly. So I'm going to define the constructor first of all as we normally would, which is the same as the superclass. We're taking in kilometers and hours. Now if I want to get access to the superclass methods, we want things to be in the format of distance and time. So the next thing I'm actually going to do is use super to call one of these methods. I'm going to call the constructor method from the superclass. So now we can set up our variables in a way that even though kilometers and hours are fed in, it gets treated as distance time. If I write kilometers and hours in here, now, so kilometers and hours are fed through when we call the subclass, goes in here, we're doing our constructor function, kilometers and hours are fed in, then we use super to access the constructor function here from our superclass, and kilometers and hours get fed in as distance and time. And now this has been set up properly, we can use speed and return time trip because the the superclass has access to distance and time information now. So if I run that, my code will have created an object called car journey 1, and inside that you see all the methods that were set up in the superclass. So if I go to speed, it's going to say we're traveling 50 kilometers an hour. So that's good. What if I wanted to add a bit more complexity to the car journeys class, but leave the travel calcs alone to be our kind of general superclass if we wanted to write other subclasses that use those functions. So let's say in our car journey we take a stop and we say stop time is 0.5 hours, so we stop for half an hour. So stop time is now passed into our car journeys class. So I'm going to have to add that in our constructor, and also attach it to our car journeys object. Self.stopTime equals stop time. Great, so let's run that, see if it works. Car journey 1 now has stop time attached to it, 0.5 hours. So now we might want to define another function called trip time with stop. And that will pass in the object self. So to calculate the trip time with a stop, actually let's call this return trip time with a stop. That way we'll demonstrate how we can use the return trip time and add the time for one stop. So this function is going to return, and we use super to call any functions from the superclass, return trip time, and put the brackets after it, plus the time that we stopped for. So now let's try that. Car journey 1 has this return trip time with a stop. So you can see if we went to our destination back to the start with a half-hour stop, it would take 4.5 hours. So I hope that makes things a bit more clear about how you actually use subclasses and superclasses in a functioning Python code. And in our third video of this tutorial, I'll go through some more advanced methods of using subclasses and superclasses, mainly how one subclass can feed from multiple superclasses. Thank you for listening.